elections. We've assembled this morning, we're assembled this morning, I should say, to provide the context for what many have judged to be the country's most critical election in generations. And for this, we have a panel of four of Washington's most well-informed and thoughtful analysts of the Pakistan political scene. But first, a word about our format for this morning's panel discussion. I'm Marvin Weinbaum, director of MEI's, Middle East Institute's Afghanistan-Pakistan program. And I'll be acting as moderator, and we'll make some brief remarks about our topic at the outset. I'll then identify our panelists and proceed with a series of questions to the panel that are intended to promote ample discussion. After that, there'll be an opportunity for our remote audience to pose their own questions. As for this purpose, use the Q&A option on your screen. And if you want your questions answered, it's best to keep them short and to the point. You can write them anytime during the course of the program. If you need assistance for whatever reason, write to events@mei.edu. As we approach an election that will choose members of Pakistan's National Assembly, provincial assemblies, the background against which this is occurring is a country that has undergone months of political wrangling over the holding of elections, a struggling economy, heightened ethnic and regional tensions, rising terrorism, and mounting environmental challenges. On trial with this election may really rest the very future of Pakistan as a constitutional democracy. And as well, the country's ability to elect a national government able to address its some existential problems. About the election itself, there is much that seems reasonably certain and still more that appears uncertain. Seems to me that it's probably safe to conclude that after delays, many doubts that the election's taking place on the designated February 8th date, that it will be held on schedule, and although conceivably, not in districts of Baluchistan or Khyber Pakhtunkhwa provinces where it might still be postponed for security reasons. It seems that no single party is likely to emerge with a National Assembly majority, and that the next government will be composed of a coalition of party-affiliated and independently elected members. As in so many previous elections, this one will probably be decided not by voters choosing between competing ideologies, but by the personalities and allegiances of those on the ballot. It's pretty certain that Imran Khan, widely conceded to be the country's most popular political figure, will sit out this election and may very well never be allowed to return to power. And among the other near certainties, I think we can probably agree that this election, as in so many other areas, the military establishment is clearly in the driver's seat. As for the election's uncertainties, several stand out. Will there be widespread election day fraud? And can the country avoid violence? Will the country's militant groups try to interfere, particularly in Baluchistan and KP? Will Nawaz Sharif's Muslim League, in fact, emerge as the strongest party and be able to form governments in Islamabad and crucially also in Punjab? Can, despite the obstacles thrown at the PTI, can independents loyal to Imran Khan pull off an election surprise? Will a Nawaz-headed government be widely accepted by the electorate? avoiding post-election violence and renewed political instability. Many of these assumptions and open questions will undoubtedly be among those areas covered by the panelists. And now, let me introduce our panel. Medea Afzal is a fellow in foreign policy program at Brookings. She was previously David M. Rubenstein Fellow in the in Brookings Foreign Policy Program. Her work focuses on U.S.-Pakistan relationship, U.S. policy towards Afghanistan, Pakistan's politics and policy, and extremism in South Asia and beyond. Medea has worked as an assistant professor at the public policy at the University of Maryland in College Park. Michael Krugelman is director of the Wilson Center's South Asia Institute. He's also a columnist for Foreign Policy magazine, writes its South Asia Brief, which are weekly news and analysis of the region. Michael has managed the South Asia portfolio at Wilson Center since 2007. He leads the center's programming and research in the region. He's published op-eds and commentaries in the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Foreign Affairs, Politico, Bloomberg, View, CNN, Al Jazeera, and NPR, which he was on as a commentator yesterday, and newspaper and magazines in India and Pakistan. Syed Muhammad Ali is a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute. He has extensive work experience with multilateral, bilateral government and non-government organizations and on varied international development projects. He's the author of several peer-reviewed articles and book chapters, as well as the book Development, Poverty, Power in Pakistan, the Impact of State and Donor Interventions on Farmers. Muhammad Ali also writes a weekly op-ed in the Express Tribune, an affiliate of the New York Times in Pakistan. He has taught international affairs, international development, and anthropology in Australia, Pakistan, the United States, and is currently teaching graduate courses at the Advanced Academics Program at Johns Hopkins and at the School of International Service at American University. Tamanis Salahuddin is the director of the South Asia program at U.S. Institute of Peace, where she oversees USIP's work in Pakistan and more broadly in South Asia. She comes to this role with extensive regional experience in Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, Sri Lanka, and particularly political and demographic trends in the region. Her primary focus has been examining conflicts and conflict resolution across South and Central Asia and the Middle East, particularly those involving non-state actors and militant groups. She joined USIP in 2018 as a senior expert on peace processes, where she led a program to build thought leadership and expertise on sustainable and inclusive peace processes. So, with that behind us, let's begin, if we can, with our questions. What do you, the panel, see as the likely composition of a new government? On what basis do you believe most voters will be deciding how to vote? Who will start us off? Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Marvin. First of all, thank you for putting this together and having us. It's a great group to be a part of. I agree with what you said earlier. I think that no party will win an outright majority. And against the backdrop of what I would describe as a highly non-level playing field, which we could certainly get into, PMLN certainly has a strong chance of emerging on top and being in a position to lead efforts to put together a governing coalition with all of the blows, the pre-election blows that PTI has faced. PMLN appears to be in a pretty strong position to do well in Punjab, which is of course the most populous province in Pakistan and the biggest electoral prize, and that'll help. Don't want to speculate too much, but I think there's a good chance that the next government will be led by someone from the PMLN, not necessarily Nawaz Sharif, but perhaps his brother Shabazz, particularly because he's perceived to have better relations with the military than Nawaz has. And Nawaz, of course, is someone who has sparred with the military during his previous periods in office. But it could be someone else, maybe even someone from the current caretaker administration. I agree, as I think you had said earlier as well, that the coalition that emerges will likely be not very strong, perhaps quite fractious, which would make it susceptible to influence by the military. And the only other thing I'll say here is what I would describe as a wild card. And you briefly got into this before, the issue of the PTI independence. PTI has been, because of a series of legal rulings that have come out in the last few weeks, PTI candidates, there won't be candidates that can run on PTI tickets. They have to all run as independents. But there's a good chance that they'll get votes because PTI is a popular party. And if they do, that could prove to be a spoiler for PMLN potentially, if it's trying to put together a coalition. But if these PTI-sponsored independents have any chance of making an impact electorally, there's going to need to be strong turnout, and that's a big question as well. Finally, I think another element of this issue of PTI independence as a wild card is the question of loyalty. These independents may be sponsored by PTI, but I think there are questions as to whether those that win would align themselves with PTI or if they would align themselves with another party. And as I understand it, PTI leadership has said that it's carefully vetted those that it would, sponsor as independents, but they could still go in another direction, especially if they're getting pressure from certain quarters. But I'll end there.
Oh, thank you, Michael. What more is there to say? Please go ahead.
I can chime in on this question. So I think my prediction would be, and Pakistan is unpredictable, but history does repeat itself. So my prediction would be a PMLN government, barring a surprise win for PTI independence. I would wager that if the PMLN is able to cobble together a government, then Nawaz Sharif will be the next prime minister. I think his return from London in October and the cases being dropped against him, his disqualification for life being overturned in recent months has kind of set the stage for that. I think the wild card, as Michael put it, the PTI question is an important one because Marvin, you asked, on what basis do you believe voters are going to decide how to vote? I think Pakistan is a very politically polarized country, so the basis that voters are deciding on which to vote is partisanship. However, for PTI, the barriers are so huge. So a PTI voter goes to the polls, he or she may not even know who the PTI-backed candidate is because all he sees is a list of independents. It's not even the one independent candidate that's going to be the PTI candidate. There's a whole list of independents. So PTI has been using technology to get its message out. It has a website with all its candidates. It's using social media, text messaging to push out who the candidates are. But the reach of social media and technology is limited in Pakistan. And crucially, misinformation is playing a role here. So, the PTI website, sort of a clone website was set up that was a misinformation sort of based website that gave wrong information on PTI candidates, right? So there are all these different things that the PTI voter has to deal with. So while PTI is putting up a fight, sort of an assiduous attempt to try to get its message out, I think there is certainly there are barriers when the voter goes to the poll. And again, we haven't sort of talked about the question of overt rigging on election day, whether that's a question, whether there's going to be a crackdown on perhaps voters that is not on all voters, but on voters for a certain party. So, there are those questions. In Pakistan's elections, there's always a degree of uncertainty because we don't have excellent polling data on Pakistan, right? I mean, even with polling data here, things have gone differently from predictions. But because Pakistan is a parliamentary system, you need polling data on each constituency. And we've seen that essentially the candidates and candidate lists have only been announced, a few weeks before the election. There really isn't time to collect this kind of data. So all we have is kind of these national level polls that say, Imran Khan is popular or the PTI is popular, but that in concert with, the fact that Imran Khan is not running, is not the head of his party right now, given that he is, convicted and in prison. And then we have all these factors sort of going against the PTI and the playing field effectively tilted, entirely in favor of the PMLN. That's why, I made the prediction I did.
Marvin, I'm happy to step in.
Please.
Well, thank you to you, Marvin, and MEI for pulling us all together. Good to see everyone here. I mean, I largely agree with both Michael and Madiha. I think you're going to, it is unpredictable because I think most setting of the playing field happens before elections. There's much less direct rigging the day of the election. That being said, I think most bets are on some sort of PMLN-led coalition. I think I agree with Madiha that Nawaz Sharif coming back, his corruption case is being quashed. He is looking for a prime ministership. I don't think it would be a very easy way to not have him be a prime minister. I do think that whatever coalition comes out, it is not going to be a strong PMLN coalition. They're not going to have some sort of super majority. So it will be cobbled together, which makes it very weak, which makes it in some ways more manageable, but also then sets the stage for future friction again with establishment and other things. And I'm sure we'll get into that. I think the two sort of factors that both Michael and Madiha alluded to, one is the PTI factor. And if you had I would argue if you had a presidential election, and even if Imran Khan wasn't running and you had an Imran Khan stand-in, he would win. But this is a parliamentary election. So constituency to constituency, it's far more unpredictable. It's far harder. Even if Imran Khan is still the most popular leader in Pakistan, it's much harder for him to win in every single constituency. Some places he doesn't have a candidate running. Some places, as Madiha said, people don't know who his candidate is. So I think that factor is very... it could be a surprise. I just don't think they're going to be able to form a government as a PTI government. They may form a strong, opponent. They can be in the opposition. I think the second thing this does, because it's been a very muted election in terms of the campaign season, and because of all the unknowns in terms of PTI, it forces us back to constituency politics. So you do have a lot of the local electables, the traditional allegiances and local power brokers. And so you're seeing a lot of seat adjustments. And, I think 60% of candidates are running as independents. I mean, it's the highest number of independents you've ever seen. And some of those, rightfully so, are PTI, but a lot of them are not. They're defectors. They're people waiting to see who will build the coalition, where they can throw their, what they can get in return for joining a governing coalition. So I think that local politics is really important, and the role of independents will be very important in forming the new government. And just on your question of what will voters be looking to decide? As is the case always, I don't think this is not an issue-based election. I don't think that's new in Pakistan. But here, personalities and sense of aggrievement is very real. So people who are Imran Khan supporters feel aggrieved, and they may stay home from the polls. So you may have a very low voter turnout. I think it pushes us again back to that local constituencies, the electables, traditional electables, and smaller parties. People may vote for their local smaller parties. So,
Donna, it seems though when we were talking about another election, the Punjab election, not that long ago, and we were surprised, weren't we, by that? Now the circumstances are different this time. We thought that the local constituencies really would act, that would be under the influence of people who would certainly support Imran, Muslim League, and it turned out Imran Khan did very well in that. So,
no, I think that's right. I do think that old school local electables, that influence has dissipated, and I think that's also an urban-rural divide. You have much more Pakistanis in urban and semi-urban places who like Imran Khan, but it's such a murky election with Imran Khan not really being able to contest that you're going to see other factors at play here.
Okay. Muhammad Ali, any thoughts beyond what we've heard? Can you hear me, Muhammad Ali? Can you hear me, Muhammad Ali? Okay. We can't hear you. Are you muted?
Sorry. Yeah, there's some glitch. Can you hear me okay?
Now we can, yes.
Okay. I agree that the writing on the wall, because of all that's happened over these past few months, the intention is to, try and harness the popularity now of Nawaz Sharif, which is turning of the tables in these since the 2018, because he was the one who was being kept out. And I was just speaking to some people on the ground just before this, and these are people who still believe that Imran Khan is where their support needs to be. And I mentioned the fact that while there's a 40 million youth vote, so unprecedented popularity, particularly in urban areas, but then what about social media and outreach, and the fact that the PTI symbol, the bat, is no longer there? How are people in rural areas going to recognize and coalesce around the PTI? And they still hope that things like TikTok and other sort of outreach and this disgruntlement is going to enable some galvanization. Because from the PTI's perspective, I think while at the constituent level, yes, it's a numbers game. I mean, how many thousands of votes can be mustered towards a favored candidate? It gets tricky when you have an increased voter turnout. And this one person was saying that if you remember what happened in the by-elections with Hamza Sharif and in the Punjab, the PTI showed its strength despite being the underdog. But it is very unlikely that the PTI is going to emerge as a winner, and I mean all the effort that's been put into this suggests that that's going to be that's not going to be likely. However, what's going to be the role of the PPP here, right? I mean Bilawal is trying. I mean they are in the least hot seat, if you will, amongst the mainstream political parties. And then, depending on how well the PTI does, I mean, is it gonna, because for it's also, they have to fight tooth and nail, because there's all holds bar, I mean, the establishment seems to have, it's going to want to continue grinding this axe, lest they are in a position where they can, there's genuine popularity to prevent, further punishment for this transgression, right? Because it's been framed as such. So will they now, I think Imran Khan has clearly said that he wants, it's all or nothing again. But is he going to play ball with the PPP? I mean, besides the spoilers that will occur during the electoral process, subsequent to it, will they join the opposition benches? I mean, that would be sensible. How will the PPP be? I mean, we've seen the strange bedfellows, forming the caretaker government, the PMLN and the PPP, but will the PMLN be able to get that majority? Or it's going to be a increasingly shaky and weak coalition government. So those kinds of factors, one can't look into a crystal ball. We just have to wait to see what happens in the next few days.
Right, very good. Does anybody want to follow up on anything else that they said, Michael?
Yeah, very quickly, just in this question of Nawaz versus Shabazz, indeed, I don't want to overly speculate, and I do agree with what was said that he wouldn't be where he is right now, back in Pakistan, not in jail, if he was not back in the good graces of the army, to be very candid. But I think this gets to another question. My view, and I would think that others would agree, that the military is a critical player in Pakistani politics right now. If it's true, as some observers have suggested, that the army wants the next government to be focused on economic stabilization and so on, the military would probably play a key role in that effort. Would the army want, as prime minister, someone that it has repeatedly sparred with in the past? And I don't think if Nawaz were to come back as premier, that he would be more mellow than he was in the past, or that he would be, in a position to defer. I think it could be just a matter of time before there's a new crisis in civil-military relations. And would the army want that at this point in time? I don't know, but I think that's a consideration that could suggest that there might be a bit of an edge to Shabazz. But again, as Madiha and I think everyone had said, it's very dangerous to make predictions. It could be that the next prime minister is someone that we haven't even mentioned or that we haven't even thought of.
Okay, moving on then. How greatly has the public's confidence in Pakistan's institutions diminished by the months of pre-election contesting among the parties and in the courts? Thoughts on that?
I'm happy to start off, Marvin.
Please.
I was just in Pakistan for about 2 weeks in December, and it was the calmest, quietest pre-election season that I have seen.
Yes.
I've seen, at least since 2005, I've been there in every pre-election season and monitored several elections. This was very muted. And it doesn't mean that everything was calm. I think it's two things. One, it's the suppression and the engineering. So people are very disaffected from institutions generally, right? So especially in urban areas and youth, they feel very dejected. Especially I think the elite in the drawing rooms in Punjab and other places, they have never faced this type of censorship or repression that maybe their compatriots from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan have seen before, right? Everybody else is saying, we've seen this before, you're only just experiencing it. So there is this sense of being disaffected from institutions. I think post the results of the different trials against Imran Khan, among his supporters, there is very much the sense of grievance against the establishment. That being said, there are still those who have a vested interest in the status quo, and you could sense that the business elite were quite happy with the caretaker government and this sense of imposed calm, that there wasn't all this political wrangling, that things were going okay. By no means was the economy doing well, but there was this sense like, okay, we know the direction in which this is going, and we're willing to go along from the ride. And that is definitely the class that benefits from the status quo. But I would argue that, people were not out having dharnas or big political gatherings. They were very muted. It was much more a calculated political season, really focused on, who's getting tickets, seat adjustments, thinking about what the establishment wants and how can they maneuver that into, being in the next government.
Yeah, let me add to that in the questioning. Is there any evidence that the militant Islamic groups are going to play a role in this in this balloting at all in the election process. Are we likely to see any violence, any efforts here to, if not influence the election, then to disrupt the election? Anyone?
I mean, I can just quickly address that. I think we have already seen some violence, in the last week, and then at a PTI rally in Balochistan, a candidate who had been affiliated with the PTI killed in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So there is going to be some violence. My prediction is because the TTP and other groups, they are not going to have sort of the violence is not necessarily going to be partisan, and the violence is not going to disrupt the election altogether. Pakistan has held elections in much more violent periods, in particular in 2013, but also in 2008. So violence may mar the election here and there, but it won't be a major player. The militant, in terms of sort of the Islamist groups, the TLP, the Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, is the only one that is on the ballot. And my sense is that they will, they may win, some votes, but as has always been the case in Pakistan, both Islamist parties that are sort of the mainstream Islamist parties and parties like that are sort of the fringe fundamentalist parties like the TLP, they don't do well in elections. People care about delivery, service delivery, and so they will vote for the major mainstream parties, and those are the PMLN, the PPP, and the PTI. Just to quickly add on also to Marvin, your sort of larger question about the public's confidence in Pakistan's democratic institutions. For months, when we talk about Pakistan's democracy, people will say, what democracy? I mean, it's really become sort of there is the sense of hopelessness. I think the only hopelessness, there are sort of two factions where you don't see hopelessness. One is sort of the complacency, the kind of the pro-PMLN faction basically saying, look, this happened to PMLN in the past. It's fine if this is happening to PTI now. Yes, things are being managed, but it is what it is, and this is what Pakistani democracy looks like. There's kind of that faction that's accepted it, and then there's the faction of the PTI voter who is galvanized and thinks that they're going to make a difference. The sort of the optimism coming through is quite striking, at least on social media. And I wonder what happens if the election goes the way we think the election is going to go, or the way the signs point that the election is going to go on Thursday. I wonder what happens then to that kind of the youthful demographic who thought that they could make a difference, on election day. And I'm sure we'll talk about that as well. But I think at this point the Pakistani military enters this election in charge of the country. There is going to be an election, but the military is in charge of politics. It's in charge of policy, and that's both domestic and foreign policy. And we've seen that sort of in the fact that the military is now, inserting itself into questions of economic development. And the final thing I'll say there is that the last week has shown us that the judiciary has fallen exactly in line. I mean, the three convictions, one after the other, and in particular this last one on sort of the unlawful marriage, kind of has made the judiciary a bit of a laughingstock, frankly, in the country. I'm not sure the rest of the world is paying that much attention to that.
Marvin, if I might, just
Go ahead.
On the, I think it's really interesting. A couple of weeks ago, TTP came out with this very interesting statement saying that they will not attack any campaign rallies or electioneering, and that they will, they continue to attack everybody else, but they will not attack anything election related. So I think, they continue to attack police and military and other installations, but they will not attack election sites, et cetera. So I think that's interesting. I do think in talking to folks there, the reinvigoration of certain sectarian groups, SSP and others, and their remnants, that can be, especially in Punjab and other places, a factor because they are partisan in constituency to constituency. But I don't see a huge, the election violence is not going to come necessarily from the terrorist and militant groups, I think. Interestingly, the ECP's sensitive and most sensitive polling places, the greatest number of sensitive polling places actually in Punjab, but the extremely sensitive ones are largely in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan. And can those be used to close down a sensitive polling station because you don't like the results of what would happen in that polling station?
Michael?
Oh, I think Ali was going to go ahead. I'll go after him.
Yeah, yes, okay, Mohammed.
Okay. So I also agree that I mean, one hopes that the violence will not get out of control, and the three obvious, risks here are the TTP. In Balochistan, of course, there's also the Baloch disgruntlement with the state, which is festering for sure. And then this third element, and I think this is a particularly sort of polarized atmosphere in which this is happening. So there are possibilities that if the establishment sees, and this will kind of start unfolding on the day, what's happening at the polling stations. But if there is a large turnout for the PTI, and if there are attempts at those particular polling sites to create blockages, how that might erupt into sort of, and this would be non-sectarian, this would be political violence. And even subsequent to, even let's say the situation is managed in a way where there's a desirable outcome, then what happens subsequently, is what's going to be the fate of Imran Khan. And and those are sort of post-electoral disgruntlements, like kind of we've seen in, and I do have to say, when we're talking about the judiciary, when we're talking about, the general sort of democratic decay, looking at Bangladesh is useful, looking at sort of Modi and the judiciary and the role that that's playing in that region, because Pakistan's had that doctrine of necessity going back several decades. So, the judiciary has played a complicated role in terms of, its relationship with the military establishment. But here, the authoritarian permutations within South Asia, while they're different, there are these underlying commonalities. And those, even when the elections are over, the day after, there's still a lot that still has to unfold. I mean, besides that, the looming poly crisis. So it wouldn't just be on election day. It's also, a lot's going to unfold subsequent to that day.
Thank you.
I would just say briefly that on your question about violence risks, I mean, we have to look at this in the context of political violence and in the context of terrorist violence, and both have happened in the past for sure, and we've seen that this time around as well. It is true that, as I think Madi had said, 2013 was a particularly terrible year in terms of terrorist violence related to the election. That was right at the height of the TTP-led campaign of terrorism. So things are really bad. But, we've seen over the last year or two a resurgence in terrorism in Pakistan, mainly perpetrated by the TTP. But, we're also seeing more terrorism from Islamic State Khorasan, as well as the separatist violence. I think that we have to look at this risk from that broader context. The TTP issue is interesting. As Tamana said before, they claim they're not going to stage violence on election targets, but this is a group that's been saying for a number of years now that they're not targeting civilians at all. Part of this attempted rebrand. But can we ever take a terrorist group at its word? No. And they have particularly nasty factions of the group that have certainly gone after civilians. But it's true that I think we're unlikely to see as much as we've seen in previous years. But to your broader question, Marvin, I think that the issue of turnout will be the most powerful signpost to give us an indication of just how much public confidence has been shaken by democratic institutions being susceptible to or the degree of turnout will be the biggest signpost that'll give us an indication of just how much the public's confidence in democratic institutions has been affected. I think another big issue to look at here is that this is not a new story, right? I mean, we talk about the election commission, the courts being susceptible to pressure from unelected forces like the military. But this is not new. I mean, we know that in the past, if you look at so many previous elections in Pakistan, there has been this precedent of politicization, entities that should not be politicized becoming so susceptible to pressure by the military and so on. It's happening now, and many within the support base of PTI would say it's never been this bad before. I'm not sure about that, but I think that for many, it's the fact that what's happening now is not new and has happened so many times in the past, I think has added to this unhappiness and skepticism and cynicism. One final note I'll make on this, if you're looking for silver linings, there's been a conversation that it hasn't had much good news and silver linings. It's true that there are some, and I certainly don't think this represents a huge critical mass view in Pakistan, but there are some that have noted that the fact that you've had an extended caretaker government that's been in power longer than constitutionally stipulated has allowed for more time for some pretty significant movement on much needed reforms, such as the fact that there's significant movement made toward privatizing PIA, which is the public-owned airline, which has been indebted for a long time. The IMF, among other key donors, has been pressuring Pakistan to privatize these very troubled public institutions. And that's happened. And some would argue that, well, that wouldn't happen if you had a political government in place because, there'd be political factors militating against taking those types of steps. So that's one silver lining. But I do think that the level of public confidence is, in terms of how it views the issue of democracy on the whole, it's really shaken for sure.
I think we're all agreed that the military is playing an outsized role in this election. How does this compare with previous elections? Are we seeing something different than what we've seen before in terms of its scale, its intensity?
If I may on this, I do think that this time around, and it's a matter of sort of consolidation in the new manifestations of structural evolution. So I mean, the military also evolves its role in the political economy. And this has to do with how sort of the global economy. I mean, if you look at the unfoldment of structural adjustment and the newer policies for international development, I think the military also responds to those. So ideas like corporate farming. It was a colonial legacy that the military and economic historians have written about this. That set the precedent for giving large land grants for serving for helping recruit soldiers in the colonial armies, British Raj, and subsequently even to serve in the First and Second World Wars. So it set that precedent for the colonial land grants to the military. And of course, then there were the more specific, like, breeding horses for the cavalry and whatnot. So then subsequently, the Green Revolution, the structural adjustment, and the military hanging on, I mean, in agrarian areas to that land, I mean, all the way up to the Musharraf era, there was like this big sort of push away from the military farms of sharecroppers to try and bring in lease farmers, the contract system. So this was happening, with agrarian liberal policies of agrarian agricultural growth. Now what we're seeing is corporate farming. Now is the time for bringing in, be it in the ambit of the BRI or other big players, right? Agribusiness. And the Pakistani military has come in and it's identified, so not only for extraction of natural resources, but also for agricultural productivity, a much more prominent role for itself. It's defined. So when it comes to its engagement with the political economy of the country, it is, it's increasingly entwined, and it's entwined into this development model, right? And it's a development model that is perhaps unique to Pakistan. We see it, we see in Sri Lanka, it's blend of nepotism. In India, we see the Gujarat model and the Shining India model. So it's not something that only Pakistan is doing. I mean, of course, but it is certainly, and this is just economics. I mean, this is the economic sphere. This is like land use, the DHAs, and then there's so much else. I mean, the fact of wanting to cocoon itself, right? In terms of the political oversight, the fact that it allowed for such empowered caretaker setup to help create the conditions for a conducive election. So I think that there is that machinery has over time, it's evolved because it has had so many resources, but its imprint, on the political economy is certainly here to stay and in certain senses be more overt, right? I mean, we haven't had in the past sort of, the chief of army staff sitting in and creating these like mechanisms for economic policy making. So, so this is something that is new. I don't know how distressing it is for the rest of the world because it's happening everywhere, and people play ball with this when it comes to real politics. But it is increasing.
Yeah. What? Go ahead, Medea.
Tamanna, did you want to?
Oh, no, go ahead, Medea. I can go after you.
I just had a quick point on the pattern versus the extent of the intervention. I think the pattern of the intervention is, something we've seen many times before. We saw this in 2018, with with Nawaz Sharif behind bars and the playing field tilted in the PTI's favor. We saw this, by the way, a lot less in the 2008 and 2013 election. So, 2008, I would say, was the glimmer of hope for Pakistan's democracy after Musharraf fell from power, and then after 2016 or so, we saw things starting to tilt again. With the military's direct involvement in politics sort of increasing. But so while the pattern is similar to what we've seen in 2018, and of course we've seen this pattern in the 1990s and prior to that, I think the extent is a little different this time around because of the zero-sum confrontation that Imran Khan took on with Pakistan's military. That has made the extent of the crackdown on the PTI a bit greater. And I would say there are two elements to that. I think the way we saw the PTI's entire senior leadership resign under ostensible pressure from the establishment, they've left politics. They resigned from the party. That's quite striking. So the PTI is going to this election without its entire previous senior leadership, other than Shah Mahmood Qureshi, who is still in jail. And then the second thing I would say is that the taking away of the election symbol, the bat, and then the taking away of the party name, that is quite striking. And that is not something that we saw in 2018, for instance, right? So in that sense, the extent is greater. And one cannot understate, or one cannot overstate the impact of that in a place where the candidates change around. So people don't know, there's a lot of horse trading, etc. So people don't know which candidate belongs to which party because we've seen the switches before. So in that case, looking at a candidate would not automatically tell you this is PTI. And that's assuming the person can read the candidate's name. So, the impact of that cannot be overstated.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Madiha largely that, we've seen this pattern over and over again. I was talking to someone just recently after this Iddat case about nullifying Imran Khan's marriage. And this was a person who's an older person who had lived through the 1965 election. And they talked about how General Ayub used, similar anti-women rhetoric against Fatima Jinnah. To win that election. And so, this is not something new, to go in and have an ex-husband testifying about someone's, whether they're, menopausal or not. I mean, these are sort of some of the lowest tactics you can use. And yet this has similar tactics have been used in the past. So I don't want to say, as Madiha said, this sort of attack against who you don't want in power has happened throughout Pakistan's history. I do think in a post-Musharraf era, since 2008, and maybe the young generation of voters was almost lulled into in that 2008 period, you have seen in the last about 15 years, a military that's largely stayed in the background. They've been pulling the strings, but not so much in your face. And I think since the ouster of Imran Khan, you see it much more blatantly. The curtain is pulled back, right? You see Oz, and it is not pretty. And I think that makes a big difference. I do think there are a few other things. I mean, I think the youth activation and the youth sort of being for Imran Khan makes a big difference. Social media has changed. The level of economic crisis that Pakistanis are facing is severe. I think that changes how people react to their politicians and react to the military, and also the level of polarization, which others have raised, right? So I think the subdued election season is really tied to the polarization in the country and the disaffection from institutions. I would agree, Dr. Aisha Siddiqa talks about this as now just being a hybrid martial law regime where you have civilian government, judiciary as junior partners. So you are just in that period. And so there is uncertainty in terms of whoever is the next government, where will the friction points be? Others have raised this. If Nawaz Sharif or anyone else in the PMLN is prime minister, what are the friction points and how does that civilian government then play out, right? An election doesn't necessarily lead us to stability, for the next 5 years in Pakistan. And that to me is worrisome. But I will leave you with, there's great dark humor in Pakistan. After these cases, someone from the PMLN said to me, you always need to have a spare prime minister in jail. I mean, really reflecting how they feel that, what they suffered through. So
I'm sure you also agree that what sharpened the conflict here between the opposition here and particularly General Munir was the personal nature of the attacks that Imran Khan leveled on him, including that he's a murderer. I mean, that I think is unprecedented in the kind of dialogue that usually takes place between the military and the civilians running for office. Michael, any last thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it is important to provide some context, as we already have, for why the repression and the crackdowns we've seen in this election cycle are particularly ferocious. And I think some really good some key factors have already been identified. But you have to go back to how Khan played his cards, right? He was ousted in the no confidence vote. He could have just stood back and prepared for elections, but he pushed really hard. He pushed as hard as he could. You just mentioned some of the things that he said. The fact that a prominent popular politician like him calling out senior military officers by name, blaming them for things as he has, calling them traitors and murderers. The fact that he was, there was an assassination attempt on him, which is easy to forget now because of everything else that's happened since then. That's still a pivotal event in this recent political history of Pakistan. And then, of course, the events of May 9th, this was after Khan had been arrested the first time. He was briefly arrested. And then, protesters attacked military facilities on a level that I believe is close to unprecedented in Pakistan. Now, terrorists, separatist terrorists, Islamist terrorists have attacked Pakistani military facilities. But in terms of political violence playing out like that, these things don't happen in Pakistan. Now, the PTI's official position is that this was staged, it was a false flag, that it was carried out by the military to provide a pretext for crackdowns on the group. But the bottom line is, what exactly happened? And this is when the military crackdowns really intensified, and I think that's a big reason why. So the combination of how particularly vociferous, well, not vociferous, that's the wrong word, just how harsh the language was coming from Khan, first of all, the fact he was nearly assassinated, and then the May 9th incident. I think that really provides some useful context to understand that, yes, this is a zero-sum, confrontation between Khan and the army leadership and so on, but there's all these things that have played out within a short amount of time, which is just escalated tensions in the temperature so much and helps us understand why we've seen such a ferocious level of repression in recent months.
Yeah.
And if I may, Marvin, I think Michael makes a really good point. I don't want to underestimate the rally around the flag impact of May 9th, right? We talk about how popular Imran Khan is. Granted, he is, but there is a large portion of Pakistani society that did see May 9th as an attack on their national institutions, and it was a rally around the flag moment for them.
Well, I had a long list of questions, and you've answered them all in the course of your remarks on these first questions. But there is one last one here, and I want to leave enough time. We can run a little bit over our 11:45 shut-off date, time rather. So let me ask this, because I think this is crucial to the larger picture here of Pakistan's future. Can this election produce a government that's going to be equipped to deal with Pakistan's economic, social, security, environmental issues? Is it going to be possible for this government here, whatever its composition here, to serve as a vehicle for changing the direction of Pakistan's policies, which everybody agrees have been lacking in dealing with these issues? What thoughts on this? And then we'll move on quickly to our questions, because we've got some good questions that I think are waiting to be addressed. Michael, you're about to talk, so please.
Yeah, I'll be brief. The short answer to your question, in my view, is no. But I think that a lot of the answer will depend a lot on whether the next government is perceived to have legitimacy and a strong mandate. If turnout is particularly low, it's not going to have a strong mandate. If large numbers of the public reject the election results, it won't have a strong mandate. As I think we've all said, or most of us have said, likely the next government will be weak. The coalition will be weak, and that would leave a little space for politically risky moves that would nonetheless be important to get to the point that you laid out in your question in terms of providing more sustainable economic relief and so on. I think a key question moving forward is, will the next government be able to do structural reforms? Will it pick up on what we've seen to an extent with this caretaker administration, which of course is heavily influenced, if not driven by the military? The current IMF loan that Pakistan has expires soon, I think in March. It's going to have to negotiate a new one. The IMF will be pushing for those reforms. Will this next government have the political skin, so to speak, to push ahead? I wouldn't bet on it, quite frankly.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this?
I'd like to come in here, and yes, with the IMF, I mean, certainly, with the fiscal deficit, that is a major problem. It became quite scary. I mean, after Sri Lanka, people were thinking Pakistan might be next. So there has been that breather. But I think there is limited space, within the country, no matter who was in power, because those kind of stresses have remained for a long time. I mean, we've seen, really from the late 90s onwards, the PPP has moved from that kind of leftist, and we can debate what kind of progressive agenda that was, to this kind of centrist position, as had happened, with the Labour and the Democrats in the US. Of course, in a developing country context, there was that movement. So I think economic policy wise, there's not much of a difference except for the involvement of the military, which had irrespectively also been growing. And really, the issue here is, does the market mechanism, working as it does in these asymmetrical contexts without level playing fields, can it avert elite capture, or does it exacerbate? So when we look at sort of growth and inequity, which is not a Pakistan-specific problem, there's that long-term prospect of economic management. And then there are these other issues. So I mean, and I think there it depends on how the situation is also going to unfold regionally, how the US is going to engage with Pakistan, how Pakistan will be able to manage China and the US. And there are these impending threats like climate, right? And given what's happening in India, and I mean, some people are saying if somehow Nawaz Sharif, miraculously emerges with a very muscular government, will the India factor, given the direction in which India is going to go now, will that become another cause for a rift, a few years down the road between the military and Nawaz Sharif, because he's had that more mercantilist, approach to dealing with India. So all those factors remain. And while there is going to be some maneuverability, I don't personally see a very drastic, because there was no green agenda, and no political party was running on that. Imran Khan's populist agenda was not, I mean, when he brought in the electables, he didn't have significant, he tried to do stuff in education, didn't work too well. So I don't really see, at that ideological or policy level, a distinct set of policies that one can ascribe to a particular political outcome. And these are longer term engagements, with states trying to maximize their interests. So in that sense, it's going to be slow going. I don't really see, an overnight the pages being turned for a different book, for a different path.
Okay, so quickly, any other thoughts on this about the
Yeah.
ability of government
Yeah, I mean,
to be different than other governments that we've seen in dealing with
I'm not an
pressing
optimist on
problems?
this. Yeah, I'm not an optimist on this. I think, look, security issues are completely in the realm of the military establishment. I wouldn't even talk about those. In terms of economic and social ones, I think tactical issues will be the test of any government. Getting an IMF program, stabilizing the economy to the extent they can, those will all be the initial and very immediate tasks of any government that comes to power. I agree with Mohammed and Michael that the long-term structural changes, they just won't. By definition, we've said it's going to be a weak coalition government. So they're not going to have the power to do those things. B, a lot of these things touch on vested interests, not just the military establishment, a lot of other vested interests. And there just won't be space to do those. I mean, you can take, for example, PPP has put out this huge manifesto that promises the moon and stars. For example, they will get rid of the federal ministries that were devolved years ago and save all of that money. Now, even that, which seems like that wouldn't be that hard to do, to get rid of these federal ministries that are duplicated at the provincial level, they're not going to be able to do it because there are so many interests in keeping these things. So A, they're probably not going to be, they're not winning the election. And B, even if they did, it would be very difficult for them to make these type of structural changes in such a, fragile coalition.
Last word, Michael. I'm sorry, Medea.
No problem. The short answer, no. I don't think there's going to be, we're going to see, big changes. We're going to see structural reform, a new Pakistan, if you will, with this new government. And I think part of the thing is that we've seen, if if it is what we expect, the outcome is what we expect, which is, a weak but a PMLN government. We've seen the PMLN in power before 3 times, and a PMLN-led coalition that was just in power from April 2022 to August 2023. And so, it's unlikely that things will fundamentally change. What we also know is that if Nawaz Sharif is the prime minister, it's a ticking clock on the partnership with the military, which this new government will almost certainly start out with, is the government in partnership with the military. And so it may seem strong to begin with, but that partnership is likely to fray, because that is, certainly what's happened in Pakistan before. For any government to actually make fundamental changes, A, Pakistan would need a free and fair election, and B, it would need stability. So no interference in the electoral term. So a prime minister finishing his 5 years in office. And I don't think we are going to see either of those two things this time around.
Okay, if we can move on to our questions. It's been asked whether this election is going to affect Pakistan's foreign policies. Well, I think Tamana already answered that in the sense saying, well, this is not in the realm of discretion of a civilian government. And so I guess the only way to see it is this likely to change among the military?
No, I mean, I do, just to clarify that, I do think fundamental issues of national security and foreign policy are the realm of the military establishment, no doubt. But I do think who is prime minister adds, either makes it harder or easier for Pakistan to do business with its neighbors and its, more international allies. I think Imran Khan introduced a bit of instability in a lot of their relationships. So I think a lot of partners, including those in the Gulf, maybe in China, what they want to see is stability. And so having a government that, at least for a period, may be a ticking time bomb, but Nawaz Sharif or a PMLN-led coalition may be seen as some period modicum of stability that people can do business with, right? I do think there have been noises made from across the eastern border that New Delhi sees Nawaz Sharif as someone that, a third-term Prime Minister Modi can do business with. They did have some sort of a personal relationship, from his last term. That being said, nobody in Pakistan imagines that there is some sort of breakthrough with India, right? They are very suspicious that New Delhi has any intentions of having a breakthrough with Pakistan. So this would be very marginal benefits. On Afghanistan, Iran, I saw some of the questions in the chat.
Okay.
That's not, I mean, it doesn't really matter who the prime minister is. Here, I think you're going to see more of the same type of policy.
Yeah. Okay, fine. Thank you for answering that question as well.
If I could
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I agree with what Tamana had to say, but I would make one point that I think is an ironical one, that there's going to be a number of non-democracies out there that are going to be hoping for a relatively successful election in Pakistan, just because of their hope that that would bring some modicum of political stability and economic stability. I'm thinking here of China, I'm thinking here of the Saudis and other Gulf states that have a lot of key investment and trade interest in Pakistan. So absolutely agree with what Tamana said about countries wanting to see more stability in Pakistan. I would also argue that the Sharif brothers, the advantage that they have if they are back on the scene is that they have some pretty close personal ties to key donors. Certainly the Gulf states, but also China. I mean, there's been a lot of disagreements among the different parties as to who deserves the credit for CPEC, but PMLN was there in power when CPEC was formally inaugurated. My sense is that Beijing has a comfort level with the PMLN and the Sharif brothers that they did not have with PTI and Khan, particularly because Khan's government briefly decided to step back a little bit from CPEC and examine what was happening. The military, I think, didn't like that, so that didn't last long. But I think that in that sense, that many of Pakistan's key friends, key donors, not necessarily in the West, but the ones that I've mentioned, would be perfectly comfortable with the return of the PMLN.
You know, expanding the geographic scope here of what we've been talking about, another question is Pakistan's foreign policy toward the U.S., Palestine, Israel, a factor of any significance in this election? Or we could say, is it likely to change with a new government?
Well, I mean, certainly PTI or some within PTI would like to make it about the U.S. because we know that for a very long time, Khan had this narrative that the U.S. government was behind his ouster. And of course, that's something that the government that succeeded him and certainly the military has been trying to move away from that as much as possible for a number of reasons. One being that the U.S. is a key economic partner at a moment when Pakistan is going through severe economic stress. But yeah, I don't think those issues are factors in this election.
Okay.
If
Yeah, go ahead.
I can add a couple of things, a couple of points to the great points that have already been made. On India, yes, Nawaz Sharif has had a good relationship with Modi in the past, but things have changed markedly for the Pakistan-India relationship since then. And in particular, I would say, after August 2019, the revocation of Kashmir's autonomy, that has made politically it very difficult for anyone in Pakistan to do business with India. And Pakistan basically sees that kind of as the hurdle, the red line from its perspective. And unless that changes, I don't see any movement there. So there might be some marginal change, but nothing major. On U.S.-Pakistan relations, I think, for the remainder of this year, because obviously the U.S. is in an election year, I see the Biden administration's policy, which has been, I've argued like a two-track policy towards Pakistan, engagement with the State Department and Pakistan's foreign ministry, but zero engagement from the White House, not changing, regardless of who comes into power for this year. And of course, then the U.S. has, an election, and things may depend on, what administration we see next.
Any other thoughts here, Mohammed?
Yeah, I mean, I'd also, pull back a little and look at it from the perspective of other states. So I mean, like as far as I think China and the US go, I think here is an opportunity that whatever leg room, wiggle room the new prime minister has, and there is that advantage with the Sharifs. But it also depends on how, where the US elections go and how the US, and we've been mulling over some of these ideas, like what is, the low-hanging, mutually beneficial, possibilities, policy options that no matter, what happens in Pakistan, are issues that have to be dealt with and how. Right, so thinking of like great power collaboration versus great power competition related opportunities, right? Dealing with the environmental challenge. And I mean, the US is in a tricky position when it comes to now dealing with India and Pakistan, the erosion of trust and its own strategic interests. But are they not issues like climate, right, where there are possibilities for not only doing work within Pakistan, but doing work at the regional level? Because I mean, even the military here, the Department of Defense realized
Your voice is breaking up, so I think we'll have to conclude with this. Our time is just about run out. Any last thoughts on the part of the panel here? And by the way, sorry that I will be unable to get to all the questions. There was some overlapping. I think we've covered the great many of them, though. Any last thoughts here? Okay. Well, I want to thank what I think has been a marvelous panel. You people have covered so much and in such depth, really. It's been a treat, I think. And I'm so pleased that you agreed to join this panel. And I want to thank also the audience for good questions and for tuning in on us this morning. And we hope MAI will have further panels on Pakistan in the near future. And so we'll be welcoming you back all, I hope. Thank you so much for being part of the program this morning. And with that, we'll close.